This video is about a former Black Ops commando who faked his death for a quiet life in Boston, and comes out of his retirement to rescue a young girl and finds himself face to face with Russian gangsters. This guy's name is McCall. He worked in a store, and he is assigned to hardware. This guy is Ralph. McCall trains Ralph because he wants to be a security guard. And after his work, McCall immediately went home. And when he couldn't sleep, he went to a coffee shop to have coffee. And while McCall was having coffee, he met a girl named Alina. And the next day, McCall and Alina met again. And they talked about the book that McCall was reading. And while they were talking, someone called her, and a fat man picked her up. And the next morning, he trained Ralph. In the evening, McCall went to the coffee shop again and he gave Alina a cake. And they both talked. And after they talked at the coffee shop, they immediately walked home. And while they were walking home, a car stopped and picked her up because there was a customer who wanted her. And they hurt her. So McCall realized that there was a problem. And immediately the men left with Alina. And the next day, McCall found out that Alina was in the hospital. That's why McCall immediately went to hospital. And he saw that Alina's face had wounds. So McCall talked to Alina's friend to get information. And the next day, McCall thought about what his plan. And that evening, McCall went to a restaurant, and he went to the office of the man that Alina worked for. And they both talked. But McCall was just laughed at. And McCall wants to buy Alina for $9,800 so that Alina can be free. And when they shook hands, this man changed his mind again. And insulted her. And returned the money to McCall. So McCall got annoyed. And when McCall was leaving, McCall heard some bad words. That's why McCall didn't go out and he locked the door so no one could go out and enter. And when McCall faced these Russian gangsters, McCall planned how he would kill this Russian gangster within 16 seconds. And immediately McCall started killing these Russian gangsters. And he killed them immediately. And McCall immediately went home. And the next day, the killer of the Russian gangsters has arrived to investigate how the 5 Russian gangsters were killed. And the next day, McCall looked for Ralph because he didn't come in. And McCall found out that Ralph had left work. So he went to Ralph's store. And McCall asked Ralph how their store burned. Ralph just lied. But McCall realized that Ralph was lying. And that night, there were 2 police officers asking for money from Ralph's store. And when these 2 policemen came out, McCall talked to them and showed them the video on McCall's cell phone of them asking for money from the stores. But they threatened McCall. So he beat up 2 corrupt policemen and made McCall return their stolen money. Because if not, McCall will spread the video of the 2 corrupt police. So the next day, they immediately returned the money. And Ralph is back to work. While this killer killed Alina's friend because she lied to the killer. While Ralph has become a security guard. And the killer found out who killed the 5 Russian gangsters. And he visited McCall and pretended to be a policeman. But McCall noticed it, and immediately left. And the next day, the killer investigates McCall. And McCall is also getting ready. And that night, when McCall was at the coffee shop, someone wanted to kill him, but McCall killed him immediately. And McCall immediately turned off the light. And when McCall came out, he took a picture of the killer's car. And when McCall got away, they immediately followed him. But McCall escaped, so they went to McCall's house, but McCall was not there, and the killer found out that McCall was watching them. And the killer was annoyed. And immediately these people left. And the next day, McCall immediately went to the couple he knew to ask for help and to ask questions about the killer. And McCall was given information about the killer and the man named Pushkin. And the next day, McCall went to a policeman who was helping the killer. And he tortured him to give information about their boss named Pushkin and what his businesses are. And later, the 2 of them went to the butcher's shop. But it turns out that the inside is cleaned with money. And McCall shut it down and called the police to confiscate Pushkin's money. And when they couldn't find where McCall was, McCall went to the killer. And they both talked about the killer's past when he was young. And McCall also warned the killer to choose a good decision if he doesn't want to die. And McCall immediately left, and when he got home, he opened a flash drive and handed over its files to a policeman who was investigating the case. And later, McCall blew up another of Pushkin's businesses. While the killer is scolded by Pushkin because his business is running out. And the killers are getting ready because they will rush to where McCall works. And a few hours later, the killer called and McCall had to go to his workplace. Because if not, they will be killed. And McCall immediately went. And an hour later, McCall arrives and knocks the killer's body down. And McCall let the hostages escape. And McCall immediately turned off the light to make it difficult for the killers. And McCall immediately prepared traps. And McCall has already killed the killer's people one by one. Until McCall faced a large-bodied killer. McCall had a hard time, but he also killed him immediately. And Ralph helped him stand up. And he orders Ralph to go to the circuit box to turn on the light to detonate something inside the oven. And when the killer was about to kill Ralph, McCall shot the killer with a nail gun. And he paralyzed him and killed him with a nail gun. And then, McCall immediately left. And 3 days later, McCall went to Moscow to kill Pushkin. And 2 days later, McCall and Alina met. And her life is good and she has a good job.